So in 2012, I gave up blogging. It was taking a lot of time, but I really started eliminating the blog posts in 2000, early 2011, because I was writing my academic book on Spencer. And I uh, devoted maybe a year to just writing every week what I'm listening to this week post, which is about interesting books, interesting things that I found on YouTube that I thought were really interesting. But just writing a post called What I'm Listening to This Week was too self-indulgent. Why should anybody care what I was listening to? And so I stopped that as well. So now I'm back and I want to write about music. But I have a reason for wanting to write about music. It's not just that I'm self-indulgent. The message of the avant-garde has not changed since the 1920s. It comes, it goes. It came in the 80s, it came in the 60s, and it came in the 20s. And the 20s really is the decade where it really took off and did something really new. Um, the message of the avant-garde is that they wanted to discover new possibilities for being whole, as opposed to being partial people. I understand that. The same thing is true of the literature, which I studied for 12 years in entirety, although not all at once. Um, People in literature think that they have a handle on being whole. And it's odd because the marketable skills that everybody else has are viewed in the hardcore humanities as being something that make them partial. If you're a typist, which is the only skill I had when I got out of graduate school after 12 years, after 8 years in graduate school, after 12 years in the whole, the only skill I had was the skill of being able to type. And I was very happy that I could type so fast because when I went into school, I couldn't type at all. But people take pride in the fact that they're whole. And wholeness has been tied to uselessness. That you might not have a great earning potential, but you have something even more sacred, which is you're a whole person. You're not going to go into the world of money and marketing and all those things that destroy the good in the world. But the fact is that that ideal has not changed. And the question I had in Poker Tales is whether it should. I also want to point out that music has gone through a lot of changes. And I'm just going to point out three, um, or four. You had the classical age in the 19th century, in which Wagner and Chopin and all these guys participated. Then you had jazz came along. And after jazz had 50 years of preeminence, rock and roll came along, had, 30 to 40 years of preeminence, and that was the era that I grew up in. And then in the 80s, I remember hearing my first hip-hop record, rap record, in the dorm in 1980. Um, Now, that's not to say that the same sense of wholeness can be had in music. It can. So I put a playlist underneath this um, by a woman named Kate Earl, who I really like. I don't want there to be any mistake about that. In the playlist, she starts off singing a song called Melody, in which she sings the words, I find I'm never alone, I find that my heart is my home, the music within makes me whole, a world that I built on my own, which is a nice sentiment, but it's a private sentiment. And you can have that private sentiment if you want to retreat to your private world. And no complaint with that. But when I'm a writing teacher, I'm dealing with people who have to make claims in public. And if all you get from your writing teacher is somebody who's telling you, well, just retreat to yourself and you'll find everything you need there, you have no weapons to go out into the world and compete with others, maybe dominate others, but maybe just get along with others. So that to me is a problem. Now, in her song Nobody, she gets out of herself and she subordinates herself to somebody else. Uh, but she says that nobody took down my guard like you, nobody moved in their toothbrush so soon, nobody does whatever they want like you. And again, that might be a good solution to the problem of public expression. You just subordinate yourself to a powerful man. However, that sounds to me a lot like a sexist solution. And I put my favorite song by Kate Earl on here to defend her from the charge that she's just a sexist person. It's called You Can't Treat Me That Way," or "You Can't Treat Me That Way." And in that song, she says, "You've got a woman who knows her worth and ain't prepared to compromise it. You better listen. You better make it better. But don't make me say you can't treat me that way." That is a song written by a powerful woman. At the essence of all that, however, is the notion that the individual is or should be whole, and that if they're not whole, they're going to be dragged into some subordinate relationship by some feature, not the god of love, they used to call it, or whatever, that just stands outside of reason. And I think that is a problem not for artists who tend to be private people, but for people who want to travel in public. Okay, I want to make it very clear that I have no problem with that in and of itself. My problem comes when I attempt to figure out the relationship between the public world and the private world that exists in her whole inner world. Kate Earl, it seems to me, turns art into a private affair. And once you're outside of yourself, you must compromise. She won't do it, and that makes her a strong person. But, that's not necessarily the best way to form good relationships. Good relationships are formed by compromising with people, not by standing your ground and saying, this is what I believe, and I'm a principled person. There's nothing you can say that's going to change my mind. And this would apply to America. So in China, you have a powerful political class who believes that they want to control not of the private thoughts of people, although they probably do want that. They want to control the public intercourse between people. So that if you speak out, you're going to, I was raised in the Cold War, so you'd go to Siberia, but you'd go wherever they put political prisoners in China, and you'd be taken out of the game. In the Middle East, it's even worse. You have terrorists who hate us for allowing women to run around with their shirts off, as Kate does in her song Melody, which, again, guys, you should listen to. Watch for the nakedness of Kate Earl, and for the girls, you should listen, because it's actually a really good song. My point is not to put naked Kate Earl in front of you. My point is to point out that other multiculturalism itself puts everything in Western terms. Everyone has a right to their private beliefs. The public sphere is for getting along. So what happens when somebody comes into the public sphere and doesn't want to get along, or thinks differently, and has reasons for thinking differently? And then they have to be corralled, if you will, into thinking the way everybody else does. Now, there's some serious problems that come from maintaining this posture. One of those problems is that to determine whether Kate, as I think, is a good person, or whether she is, as the terrorists think, a bad person. Americans, of course, would answer she's good. Leave her alone. Her thoughts are her own. But if that's the case, why do we need a public debate? Everybody should be allowed to do whatever they want in private, and that's something that Steve Jobs has really given us. Everybody can do whatever they want on their iPad or iPhone, whatever. Again, I don't have any problem with that, but it causes stresses in the public world if everybody can go back to the principles on which they think their life is founded. They don't see any problem with the principles on which their life is founded. They just see everybody else in the world as being problematical. That raises the question of, are the people who hate us bad or just different? And I'm not a political person. I'm not going to answer that question. But it does bring out the question of whether Kate Earl, who wants to have her own private opinions, is a good and gentle and kind person, or is she a tyrant who forces her will on others who don't believe that people have the right to their own private opinions? In other words, she knows more than you do. She should be in charge because she knows more than you do. There's a different solution to that question, which is the question of whether she is a person who is partial, not whole. She's only dealing with the private world, which can be reduced to metaphysical principles. I think, therefore I am. I know, therefore I don't doubt. But is she a person who knows and does not doubt because she's ignorant and doesn't know it? And it's terrible to blame a person who's not really an intellectual for saying things. But I think it's a viable question to ask for intellectuals, and that is my purpose in writing this blog. I'll see you tomorrow. Subscribe to my channel, William Heise, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Thanks. Bye.